My name is John. I'm 38 years old, and until a month ago, I thought fear was a simple thing. It was a jump scare in a movie, the dread of a missed bill, the cold knot in your stomach before a difficult conversation. I didn't know it could be a physical presence, a thing that lived in your periphery and fed on the silence it created. It started with the radio. I just moved into the old Milner place on the edge of town. It was a rental I could afford on a mechanic's salary after the divorce, a squat little house that smelled of dust and regret. The walls were thin, the floors creaked, and the wiring was a nightmare waiting to happen. But it was quiet. Or it was supposed to be. I've always been a creature of habit. My nightly ritual was to clean up after a day of grinding my knuckles on engine blocks, make a simple dinner, and listen to the old AM/FM radio I kept on the kitchen counter. It was a relic from my dad, a big wooden box with a glowing dial that tuned in everything from baseball games to late-night talk shows. It was a voice in the emptiness. Comfort. The first night, the signal cut out during the weather report. Not a fade-out, like a storm interfering. A hard, sudden stop. It was replaced by a low, guttural static, a sound that was somehow too thick, too deliberate. Beneath the hiss, I thought I heard something else. A whispering. A wet, clicking sound, like an insectal tongue against teeth. It lasted for maybe 10 seconds before the clear voice of the broadcaster snapped back, apologizing for technical difficulties. I shook it off. Weird radio skip. It happens. But it kept happening. Every night, at exactly 9:17 p.m., the signal would die. The static would pour from the speaker, and that sound would be underneath it. Each time, it felt like it lasted a fraction of a second longer. Each time, the whispering felt a little closer, a little more articulate, though I could never make out a word. It was the tone that got to me, a mixture of immense hunger and profound, endless loneliness. I started dreading 9:17. My peaceful ritual became a countdown to terror. I'd find myself staring at the radio's dial, my fork hovering over my plate, my heart already starting to thud. The rational part of my brain, the part that fixed things by identifying the problem and solving it, was screaming at me. It's a faulty capacitor. A wire grounding out. It's all in your head, John. You're still raw from the split. You're lonely. But the animal part of me, the part that feels the dark and knows what might be lurking in it, knew better. One Tuesday night, I'd had enough. I was a mechanic, damn it. I could fix this. At 9:16, I unplugged the radio. I felt a surge of triumph. See? No power, no problem. I sat back down, a smug smile on my face, and took a bite of my cold meatloaf. At 9:17, the static began. It wasn't loud. It was a soft, insidious whisper of sound coming from the unplugged, powerless radio on the counter. The dial was dark, but the sound was unmistakable. That thick, hungry static. And the clicking. This time, it was clearer. It was the sound of something trying to form a word it didn't have the anatomy for. I froze. My blood turned to ice water. This wasn't a malfunction. This was something else. I stumbled back from the counter, my chair screeching against the linoleum. I didn't take my eyes off the radio. The static seemed to pulse, to breathe. The whispering grew more frantic, more desperate. I felt a cold spot bloom in the kitchen, a pocket of winter that made the hairs on my arms stand up. And then I heard it. Not through the radio. Behind me. A dry, papery rustle from the living room. I spun around. The room was dark, shadows pooling in the corners. Nothing moved. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I stood there for what felt like an hour, barely breathing, listening. The static from the radio had stopped. The house was dead silent. That's when the fear truly changed. It wasn't about the noise anymore. It was about the silence it left behind. It was the feeling of something being in the silence with me. I stopped using the radio. I stopped eating in the kitchen. I started going to bed early, burying my head under pillows, trying to block out the world. But at 9:17, every night I'd hear it. Not from the kitchen. From the walls. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration, a resonance in the very bones of the house that translated directly into that awful static inside my skull. The thing was tuning into me. Last night I broke. I couldn't take it anymore. At 9:16, I was ready. I had a sledgehammer from the garage. I stood in the kitchen, my hands sweating on the wooden handle, staring at the radio. I would smash it to splinters. I would break the connection. 9:17. The static didn't come from the radio. It came from the doorway to the hall. I turned slowly, the sledgehammer feeling impossibly heavy. The hallway was pitch black, a tunnel of shadows. But the static was there, emanating from the darkness. And in the center of the blackness, 2 points of light flickered into existence. Not eyes. They were too pale, too shifting. They were like tiny, malformed stars seen through a filthy lens. The whispering started again, but now it had a direction. It was coming from the thing in the hall. It was a voice made of broken glass and rotten meat. It spoke a single word. My name. Shahjahan. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. A confirmation of arrival. I didn't think. I screamed. A raw, primal sound I didn't know I could make. I swung the sledgehammer, not at anything, just at the air, at the terror, and I ran. I blasted through my own back door, out into the cold night, and I didn't stop running until I was pounding on my neighbor's door, sobbing. They found me babbling about the static. They think I had a psychotic break. Maybe I did. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. They let me back in this morning to get my things. The house is empty. The radio is gone. I'm writing this from a cheap motel room 20 miles away. The room is silent. But my watch says it's 9:17 p.m. And the motel room's old analog TV is off. Its screen is dark. And in the perfect black silence of this room, if I listen very, very closely, I can just make out the faint, hungry hiss of static beginning to rise. My name is Noah. I'm 29, and I've been running from silence my whole life. I fill it with podcasts, with music, with the relentless hum of city traffic outside my apartment window. Silence isn't golden, it's empty. It's a void waiting to be filled with every stupid mistake I've ever made. So when my grandfather died and left me his old cabin cruiser, the wandering minstrel, I saw it as a sign. A summer alone on the river, fishing, reading, fixing up the old tub. It sounded peaceful. I thought peace was what I needed. I was wrong. The boat was moored at Blackwater Lock, a forgotten slice of backcountry where the river widened into a vast, peat-stained lake. The water was so dark it looked like oil, reflecting the crowding pine trees that seemed to swallow the sunlight whole. The only sounds were the lap of water against the hull and the cry of loons, a sound that's less like music and more like a lost soul laughing. The first few days were fine. I cleaned, I fished, I drank beer on the deck as the sun set. The silence was heavy, but I fought it with a portable speaker. It was on the fourth night that the sound stopped. I'd gotten used to the night's chorus, frogs, insects, the distant splash of a fish. But that night, it all died at once. It wasn't a gradual quieting. It was a switch being flipped. One moment, the world was alive. The next, It was buried under a blanket of absolute, suffocating silence. I paused the podcast I was listening to. "Hello?" I said, and my voice was shockingly loud, eaten by the stillness the second it left my mouth. I stepped out onto the deck. The moon was full, casting a sickly silver sheen on the black water. The world was holding its breath. Not a ripple, not a rustle. The air itself felt thick and dead. That's when I saw it. Out in the middle of the lake, maybe 100 yards from the boat, the water was perfectly smooth. Unnaturally smooth. While the rest of the lake had a slight, natural chop, this was a perfect, glassy circle, as if a giant plug of oil had risen to the surface. I stared, my skin prickling. As I watched, the circle began to widen, moving slowly, silently toward the boat. Where it passed, the water fell utterly still. It was a wave of nothingness. I stumbled back inside, locking the cabin door, a useless, human gesture against something so profoundly wrong. I pressed my ear to the wood. Nothing. No lapping, no wind. Just a void. I don't know how long I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs. Eventually, the sounds of the night returned, one by one, as if someone had flipped the switch back on. The frogs tentatively started their chorus again. I spent the rest of the night with every light on, clutching a fillet knife, feeling like the world's most pathetic sailor. I told myself it was a freak weather phenomenon, a temperature inversion. Anything my rational mind could grab onto. It happened again the next night. And the night after that. Always at the same time. The world would go mute, and the still patch would appear, each night getting closer, its approach more deliberate. I stopped going out on deck. I'd just sit inside, sweating, listening to the terrible silence press against the windows, waiting for the creak of the boat that would mean something was trying to get on board. Last night, it reached me. The silence fell. I was sitting on the cabin floor, my back against the bunk, a flashlight in one trembling hand. I heard it then. A new sound in the void. A soft, wet, dragging sound against the hull. Like something heavy and sodden being pulled along the fiberglass. It stopped right beside me, on the other side of the wall. I held my breath. The boat listed ever so slightly, as if a great weight was leaning against it. Then, the knocking started. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the hull. They weren't loud. They were soft, almost polite. But they vibrated through the entire frame of the boat. They were followed by a sound I will never forget, a low, watery inhale, like a drowned man drawing breath through a lungful of swamp weed. It was a sound of profound hunger, of an emptiness that wanted to be filled. I screamed. I couldn't help it. I screamed and I scrambled for the ignition, my hands slipping on the keys. The engine coughed, sputtered, and roared to life. I slammed the throttle forward, and the wandering minstrel lurched away from the thing at her side. I didn't look back. I navigated the dark river by moonlight and pure terror, not slowing down until I saw the dim lights of the marina. I tied up, ran to my truck and drove. I'm in a roadside diner now, 50 miles inland, surrounded by the clatter of plates and the murmur of people. Normal sounds. Human sounds. But it's not enough. The silence he brought is inside me now. It's in the hum of the fluorescent lights above me. I can hear it lurking in the spaces between the noises. I keep looking out the window at the dark tree line. I think it followed me. Not the thing from the water, but the stillness itself. It's waiting for the other sounds to fade. And when they do, I'll hear it again. The soft, wet dragging. The 3 knocks. And the hungry, empty sound of something that has finally found its way to shore. My name is Jack. I'm 41 years old, and my world has shrunk to the size of a chisel's point. I'm a stone carver, a restorer. My life is dust and noise, the slow, patient revelation of form from formlessness. I find peace in the grain of marble, in the certainty that what I'm uncovering is solid, real, and unchanging. Or so I thought. The job was at the Old City Museum, a grandiose mausoleum of a building dedicated to local history. My task was to clean and restore a massive, centuries-old marble statue they called the Sentinel. It was a nameless, armored figure from some forgotten nobleman's garden, his features worn smooth by acid rain and time. He stood 7 feet tall, a monolithic presence in a cold, high-ceilinged gallery that was closed for renovations. I was alone with him, and I liked it that way. The first few days were standard. I documented, I photographed. I began the painstaking process of removing centuries of grime with gentle poultices and soft bristled brushes. It was on the 3rd day that I noticed it. A flaw in the marble, right in the center of his chest plate. It wasn't a crack or a chip. It was a darker vein, a swirl of gray in the white stone that, the more I cleaned around it, began to look unsettlingly like a human iris. I leaned in, squinting under my work light. It was just a trick of the mineral deposit, a coincidence of geology. I've seen 1,000 of them. But this one felt deliberate. I shook it off. Too much coffee, not enough sleep. But the feeling persisted. I'd catch myself turning around, expecting to see someone else in the vast, echoing room. I never did. Only the Sentinel and me. Yet, the silence began to feel different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was watchful. The next anomaly was the hand. His right hand was clasped around the hilt of a stone sword. As I cleaned the filigree on the guard, I noticed the fingers. They were no longer relaxed. The index finger was slightly more extended, as if pointing. I checked my initial photos. I'm meticulous. I always take reference shots. In the photos, the hand was definitively, perfectly curled around the hilt. There was no extension. A cold dread, thick and heavy, settled in my stomach. Stone doesn't move. It can't. It's the one immutable fact of my profession. I told myself the angle of the photo was different. The light had played tricks. I was tired. I almost believed it. Then came the sounds. I was working late, the only soul in the entire wing. The only noise was the hum of my extraction fan and the scrape of my tools. Until I heard it. A low, grinding groan. Like 2 massive stones shifting against one another. It was brief, and it came from directly behind me. I froze, my chisel poised in midair. I didn't want to turn around. I knew what was behind me. Slowly, against every screaming instinct in my body, I turned. The Sentinel stood exactly as he had. But the air around him seemed warped, like looking through old glass. And the smell. The clean, dusty smell of the room was now undercut with something ancient and damp, like a long-sealed tomb cracked open for the first time. My eyes were drawn to the chest plate. The gray, iris-like flaw seemed darker, larger, and beneath it, another vein in the marble had become visible, a sharp, vertical line cutting through the stone. It looked exactly like a pupil, snapped open in a dead stare. I backed away, my tools clattering to the dropped cloth. This wasn't fatigue. This wasn't a trick of the light. Something was inside that stone, and it was waking up. I should have run. I should have called the director and quit on the spot. But 41 years of rationality are a powerful cage. And something else held me there, a craftsman's morbid, terrifying curiosity. What was I uncovering? The next day, I couldn't stay away. I had to know. The room was ice cold. The statue seemed to dominate the space even more, its shadow stretching long and dark across the floor. I approached it like a man approaching a sleeping predator. I saw it immediately. The pointing finger was now fully extended, no longer pointing at nothing. It was pointing directly at me. And the face, the features that had been worn smooth were now sharper. The line of a jaw was more defined. The suggestion of a mouth was no longer neutral. It was curved into the faintest, cruelest hint of a smile. The groan came again, longer this time. The sound of continental plates moving. The statue's head tilted. Just a degree. A fraction of an inch. But it moved. The stone moved. I stumbled back, a cry caught in my throat. The dark iris on its chest pulsed, and I felt a pressure in my own chest, a terrible, squeezing coldness. The thing wasn't just waking up. It was seeing me, knowing me, and it was hungry for something only a living thing could provide. I didn't pack my tools. I didn't turn off the lights. I ran. I ran out of that gallery, out of the museum, and I didn't stop until I was safe in the chaotic, living noise of the city streets. I quit the job. I told them it was a family emergency. They called me a week later. They asked if I knew anything about the damage. They said the statue was crumbling, that a deep crack had split it from head to toe, as if from some immense internal pressure. They said it was a shame, a total loss. I live in a small apartment now. I don't work with stone anymore. I work with wood. It feels warmer, safer. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake up feeling cold. A deep, mineral cold that starts in my chest. And in the absolute silence, I hear it. Faint and far away, but unmistakable. The low, grinding groan of stone moving against stone. And I know. I didn't uncover it. I set it free. And a thing that can escape marble, well, a locked apartment door won't do much to stop it. It's just a matter of time before it finishes its journey. And when it arrives, it will be holding the sword that, in all my terror, I never noticed it had begun to unsheath.